Hello, my name is Craig Gallen, and I'm going to be taking you through the prerequisites for the OpenNMS tutorials we'll be doing over the next period of time. The OpenNMS tutorials are all based on a GitHub repository which I have provided for you, but this GitHub repository needs to be forked by yourselves into your own account. So to do that, first of all, set up your own account for your repository, and then click on the fork button on my repository, and that will create a copy of these OpenNMS tutorials in your own account. The reason why we're doing that is that it allows you to do your own work on the repository, save your work and go back to it later on, but your work will be based on mine. In order to do that, what you will have to do is take each of the sessions that you're working on, copy it into this folder called My Practice Coursework, which is created specifically for you to work in. And then if I make any changes to the rest of the tutorials, it won't affect what's going on in your own My Practice Coursework. So it will make it possible for you to merge your work with my upstream repository later on. Now, all of this is covered in the Getting Started guide, where I talk about getting started with Git, but I also talk about the prerequisites that you need for this course. Now, the prerequisites are fairly simple. You need to have Git for Windows, which you can get from this site. Again, we've got a link for it. You need to install Git and make sure it works on your Windows environment. And you need to have Docker Desktop, which again, you can install in the Windows environment. Obviously, you can use Docker and Git in a Linux installation if you wish to do that. All of the exercises will work. So let's see how to clone this repository into your own workspace. So again, I'm assuming that you're working in your own account, that you've already forked the repository, and you now wish to check it out into your own machine. Now, when I'm doing this, I first of all tend to use Eclipse as my editor, so I'm going to start that up. But I actually usually check out my code into a location that is close to my C drive. The reason being I don't want a long class path, and I don't want to have any spaces in the class path whenever I'm making commands. So I check it out into a folder that's close to the C drive, and to do that I'm going to use git bash, which is included with the Git for Windows, and I'm going to clone the repository using this code. Now I'm going to use HTTPS, but you can use SSH. Again, you're going to have to send up access keys to do this, but I've covered that in the instructions. The access keys will allow you to save your work back up into your own repo. So you can see that I'm cloning that repository into my own space on my machine. And you can see now that I've got a copy of the repository that's online locally in my machine. If I go back to the folder, we can see that we have all of the exercises in here. Now you can see that I've checked out the folder OpenNMS tutorials, and all of the exercises are in here. Now I will be running all of my exercises from the actual sessions themselves, simply because it's my repo. But what I want you to do before you start each exercise is to copy it into My Practice Coursework. And then once you've done that, do your work in here, because that means you can save the repository back up to your own GitHub account, and I can update the other sessions without interfering with your work. So copy it into My Practice Coursework, work on it here, and then you can save it yourself and not have to merge it with any work that I change on the repository. I'm going to open a PowerShell window here. Now, you need to have Docker Desktop running, and to do that you would select Docker Desktop as your application, and you spin that up. Now, in fact, I do actually have Docker Desktop already running. So if I do Docker PS, you can see at the moment there are no containers running in my environment. But if I do an ls, you can see there's a Docker Compose file here. If I do Docker Compose up -d, I'm going to download all of the containers and start running the exercise. Now, in your case, it will probably take quite a long time to do this because it will take a while to download the containers and it'll take a while for things to start up. So don't be surprised if it takes a while. But if you do a Docker Compose PS, you can see all the containers running. And if we do a Docker Compose logs -f horizon, you'll see that OpenNMS is gradually building its database and coming up. The first time you run OpenNMS, it will take a while to get up to speed. So we'll come back to this in a minute or two. So we can see that the logs have basically finished coming out of OpenNMS. We're at a point where it is now started up. So if we now go to the web page and put in localhost 8980, put in admin as the login, and we can see we now have OpenNMS up and running. So the purpose of this exercise has simply been to get your software installed as all of the prerequisites for doing the full course. Hopefully now you've got OpenNMS running, you've got Docker installed, and everything seems to work. You should be in a good place for starting the exercises when we get going properly with session 1. Thank you.